Akwamuna gị kwara akwali elie mgbe gboo gara aga ụmụ okoro ndị ọgọdọ Igbo onye akwa ịkwana m n'ọkụ oyi.
There's an African ritual so old it was buried, not forgotten, buried, because its power was too real. It still works, but only if you speak the exact words. And those words, they've been hidden in bloodlines, dreams, and whispers. Until now, in the quiet shadows of ancestral villages, beneath the hum of everyday life, there exists a sacred formula. An incantation spoken in a tongue older than empire, older than memory. This ritual isn't written down. It's not found in any public archive, nor etched on stone tablets. It lives in vibration, in the breath of elders, in the rhythm of drum patterns, in the cracks of dreams passed from one generation to the next. Those who knew the words guarded them with their lives, not just because of colonial violence or spiritual suppression, but because the ritual itself was never meant for everyone. It is not safe knowledge, it is living code. Why was it hidden? Because it could bend reality. The ritual is not simply symbolic, it commands forces. It calls the ancestors with surgical precision, seals protection across bloodlines, and in the wrong mouth could unleash chaos. It was once used in times of great danger, war, illness, betrayal. Elders would whisper the words only at night, only after divination, only when the spirit confirmed the listener was ready. And even then, some would forget them on purpose, fearing the responsibility of power. The colonizers who swept through the continent did more than steal land. They hunted rituals. Any ceremony that involved strange speech was targeted. Drums were silenced. Sacred groves were burned. But this one ritual escaped, not because it was small, but because it was too sacred to be seen. It became invisible, hidden not in books but in blood, passed through lullabies, masked in proverbs, protected by forgetting, and yet it still works. So what are the words, and why are they dangerous? That's the mystery we'll explore, not to reveal the incantation itself. That knowledge is not mine to give, but to uncover how power moves through language, how memory guards technology, and how one forbidden ritual survived the erasure. Stay close. This is not just a story, it's a summoning. In African cosmology, an incantation is far more than poetic speech or spiritual ornamentation. It is an act of engineering, a precise sequence of syllables, vibrations, and intentions that activates unseen mechanisms in the spiritual realm. Unlike casual language used to describe or explain, ritual incantations are performative. They don't tell the world what is, they change what is. To speak an incantation is to open a portal, to reach across dimensions, to summon the forces they watch and wait just beyond the veil. Words in this context are not abstract symbols. They are keys, and only the right combination unlocks the door. An incantation is a spoken code. Not every voice can speak it, and not every language can hold it. In African traditions, language is inseparable from spirit. There are words that cannot be translated because they were never meant to travel outside the mouth that shaped them. Their power lies in their sound, the tone, the cadence, the breath between consonants. In the Yoruba cosmology, for example, there are specific ritual chants known as ofo, which must be spoken in rhythm and alignment with spiritual intent. If you miss the timing, if your energy isn't clean, the words won't work. The incantation will fail to rise. Tone is everything. Certain words are only spoken during particular phases of the moon. Others must be whispered or chanted over fire. In the Igbo tradition, a dibia, a spiritual specialist, might speak an incantation during divination, but change its tone depending on whether they are calling for protection, truth, or healing. The words themselves are living entities. Misuse is dangerous. Forgetting them is tragic. But speaking them without alignment, that can be fatal. Not in the Hollywood sense, but in the spiritual sense. The incantation becomes a blade with no hilt. Ancestral memory plays a central role in preserving these verbal technologies. Unlike written spells or scripted prayers, African incantations are stored in memory, encoded through repetition, rhythm, and oral transmission. The elders who carry them often don't teach in linear ways. They may teach through parables, through song, through silence. A child might hear a grandmother muttering during rain and not know until years later that she was altering the weather, redirecting spirits, or sealing a blessing. The knowledge slips into the subconscious. The memory wakes only when the time is right. This is why so many incantations are nearly lost. Colonial systems forced all knowledge underground. The written word was privileged, and many who inherited the power of incantation were pressured to abandon it, mock it, or forget it. But the ritual incantation, unlike passive memory, is encoded into action. It returns when it's needed. In a dream, in a near-death moment, in the hush before disaster. It is patient technology. Timeless, but waiting. To understand incantation is to understand ritual as code. Each element, the timing, the offering, the physical gestures, sets the stage. But it's the words that complete the sequence. You can light the candle, pour the libation, dance the circle. But until the words are spoken, the right words, nothing happens. The ritual remains dormant. The spiritual mechanism is locked. That's because the incantation is not just part of the ritual, it is the ignition. In this sense, rituals are like sacred operating systems and incantations are the password-protected commands. You don't speak them loudly, you don't guess them, you don't remix them. You remember them exactly, or you receive them through transmission. They are not meant for show, but for shift, for transforming the structure of the moment. When spoken properly, they don't entertain. They enforce. This is why the forbidden rituals we're exploring today centers on words. Because in African cosmology, power doesn't rest in silence or spectacle. It rests in speech, sacred, encoded, rhythmic speech that calls forth memory from the bones of the earth. And for those who know the words, truly know them, the ritual still works. In the heart of the village, before the stars are swallowed by dawn, stories are told that don't end, they echo. These aren't bedtime tales. They're warnings, accounts whispered by those who've seen the veil lift. Among them are the Dibia, Sangoma, and Griot, spiritual anchors across different African lineages, who carry first-hand knowledge of the spoken word's terrifying beauty. They are the ones who know the threshold and who know what happens when someone crosses it without permission. There is a story often told in fragments of a Dibia in southeastern Nigeria who had inherited a ritual chant from his great-grandfather. The chant was only to be used during eclipses, when the world folds slightly and the spiritual channels become porous. One night, with war looming and fear in every house, he spoke the words outside the appointed time, desperate to protect the land. Eyewitnesses say the clouds changed shape, birds flew in unnatural circles. The rain came, but so did silence. Days later, a rival chief died mysteriously, and crops that had withered began to grow. But the Dibia lost his voice permanently. He never spoke again. Some say the spirits took payment. Others say he gave too much of himself to the invocation. Either way, the ritual worked, but at a price. In southern Africa, the Sangomas, healers, and diviners are known not only for their herbal knowledge but for their command of trance and ancestral language. One tale tells of a Sangoma who stopped a lightning strike with a chant uttered in a trance state, her body shivering as if holding down the storm itself. Witnesses say she collapsed afterward, trembling in sweat, but unharmed. The thatch hut the bolt was headed for stood untouched. The villagers rebuilt her shrine that year, naming her She Who Commands Sky. But even she warned, never speak when the spirits haven't called. Words once opened don't close on their own. Then there are the griots, the memory keepers of West Africa. More than poets or historians, griots remember power. One griot from Mali, in the twilight of his life, told a tale of a boy who learned a forbidden war chant too early. He had memorized it from eavesdropping outside a closed circle of elders. When he later spoke it during a village conflict, trying to stop a bloodshed, he collapsed before finishing the final line. He had triggered something he didn't understand. The chant was meant to summon ancestral warriors, but without grounding or preparation, it overwhelmed him. The village was spared, but the boy never spoke again. The griot's final words on the matter were simple. Not all knowledge is kindness. These stories aren't myths in the Western sense. They are spiritual documentation, encoded in narrative form. They are warnings delivered with rhythm. They are tales told by those who've seen the effects of language unbound. And they all carry the same echo. Power lives in the mouth, but so does risk. There are specific times not to speak the words. When your body is impure, when your spirit is angry, when you seek revenge instead of healing, when you've not asked permission from your ancestors, when you've not received the words through proper lineage or vision. To speak the incantation without spiritual clearance is to break a cosmic law. It's not just ineffective, it can reverse. The ritual does not tolerate ego. Those who hold these words know they are not decorations. They are not to be shouted for clout or whispered for curiosity. They are keys that open things. And once opened, what comes through might not leave. And so, these tales from the threshold remind us that rituals are not toys. Incantations are not experiments. They are sacred codes, guarded by those who've crossed the line and returned. And always, with a cost. There is memory that lives in the mind, and then there is memory that lives in the mouth, the marrow, the breath between a mother's lullaby and a child's first word. In African spiritual traditions, memory isn't just recollection, it's preservation, a vault of codes passed in rhythm and repetition. When writing was absent, outlawed or irrelevant, oral memory became the operating system. And within that system, some of the most powerful knowledge, the ritual incantations, the invocation formulas, the forbidden names of spirits, were encrypted in stories, songs, and dreams. These weren't remembered by chance. They were remembered with intent. Because if forgotten, they would die. And if revealed too soon, they could destroy. The griot was the first firewall. Not just a musician, not just a historian. The griot was the living archive. In places like Mali, Senegal, and Guinea, the griot carried the genealogies of kings, the rise and fall of empires, and yes, the spiritual protocols hidden inside parables and proverbs. A griot might sing a love story on the surface, but inside the melody could be a veiled instruction for summoning protection. A battle chant, when deconstructed, might reveal an invocation to call rain or to bind a curse. The griot knew the difference between what could be sung for all and what could only be whispered in the right ear, at the right time, under the right moon. They were gatekeepers of what must never be forgotten and what must never be spoken without reason. Priests and priestesses, on the other hand, were the engineers of the unseen. In Yoruba cosmology, the Babalawo holds access to Ifa, a divinatory system built entirely on oral transmission. Ifa vases, known as Odu, number in the thousands. Each one contains proverbs, rituals, taboos, incantations, and cosmological maps. These aren't simply recited, they're chanted with exact rhythm and tone because mispronunciation can scramble the message. The Babalawo is trained to memorize these vast spiritual archives, not for entertainment, but because they are the instruction manual for spiritual survival. Hidden within these verses are codes for calling ancestors, neutralizing curses, invoking destiny, and realigning fate. When colonization tried to stamp out Yoruba religion, Ifa survived because it lived in sound, not paper. Among the Ifon of Benin, the Fa divination system plays a similar role. The Bokonon, or diviner, interprets patterns made by sacred palm nuts or chains, and each pattern links to a complex oral verse. These verses are more than fortune-telling tools. They are encrypted ancestral instructions. Some verses are simple blessings, others contain invocations and chants passed down from spirit to human. The Bokonon must not only remember these, but understand when to release them, when to conceal them, and how to use them without disturbing the balance of the world. These systems are vast, dynamic, and deeply encoded. In Igbo traditions, incantations are tightly woven into the work of the dibia. A dibia may not pass down a full ritual chant in one sitting, even to their own child. Instead, they may teach it over years, in dreams, in fragments, in riddles that make sense only when the initiate is ready. The Igbo saying, "Akwukwo mo anagi edina akwukwo." The book of the spirit is not written on paper. Speaks directly to this principle. Spiritual knowledge is not supposed to be easy to grasp or transferable through ink. It must be lived, remembered through the body and spirit, because only then can the incantation retain its force. But colonization didn't come for bodies alone. It came for language, for rhythm, for memory. Missionaries and colonial administrators saw these oral traditions as threats. Drums were silenced. Native languages were replaced with foreign tongues. Children were beaten for speaking the language of their grandparents. In that act of silencing, colonization sought not just to erase culture, but to destroy access to spiritual code. Because if the people forgot the words, they would forget how to activate their own protection. Yet memory, true memory, has a way of hiding in plain sight. Elders sang lullabies filled with metaphor. Mothers gave names that carried incantatory weight. Proverbs encoded wisdom that could be reassembled like puzzles. Even in the churches built by colonizers, some elders would hum spiritual frequencies beneath their breath, calling on ancestors with lips moving silently beneath the psalms. The memory didn't die. It adapted. Then there are the dreamers. Those who receive memory not through instruction, but visitation. In many African traditions, dreams are not idle illusions, but encrypted communications. A forgotten chant might return in a dream, sung by an ancestor. A lost verse might echo in the voice of a relative long past. In times of crisis, the dream realm becomes an archive, a spirit library that opens only when the waking world is ready. There are many stories of individuals who never trained with a priest, never learned from a griot, but were given a full ritual incantation in a dream, one that worked, one that saved a life, or stopped a storm. This is not myth. This is memory reactivating. This is why forbidden rituals still breathe, because oral memory refused to die. Even when written languages tried to flatten their nuance, even when modernity tried to make them irrelevant, even when power systems tried to shame them into silence, the codes survived because they were buried not in books, but in bloodlines, breath, and bone. You cannot burn a page that was never written. You cannot colonize a dream. You cannot decode. And so, in the chants of the Babalawo, the verses of the Bokonon, the riddles of the Dibia, and the songs of the griot, memory is alive, not nostalgic, not decorative, but active, watchful, waiting. Because one day someone will need the words again. And when they do, memory will speak. The anatomy of a forbidden ritual is never accidental. Every element, from posture to timing, from the breath before the first word to the silence after the last, is deliberate. It is not a spontaneous act of faith, but a carefully sequenced engagement with forces that do not tolerate carelessness. In African spiritual systems, especially those where oral codes govern access to power, the ritual is both choreography and invocation. It's not just what you do, but how, when, and most importantly, why. Let us begin with the body, the first altar. In many traditions, the posture taken during a forbidden ritual determines the alignment of the self with spirit. Kneeling may signal humility before the ancestors. Standing upright may channel bold intention or protective force. In certain Fon and Yoruba ceremonies, one must sit cross-legged, back straight, palms upturned, not just for physical discipline, but to open energetic pathways in the body. Among the Igbo, Adibia may bow the head and rest a single hand on the earth, grounding themselves before the first syllable is spoken. To misalign the body is to misalign the frequency. The spirit knows when the channel is not clear. Then there is the offering, the transaction that opens the gate. Offerings are not bribes or tokens. They are codes, metaphysical keys that communicate your purpose and readiness. A kola nut is not just a fruit. It is a symbol of hospitality and invocation. Palm oil represents lubrication between worlds. Water carries memory and cools spiritual heat. Blood, the most potent of all, signifies life force and is reserved for only the most serious rituals. One cannot offer randomly. A goat where a rooster is required may offend. A white cloth in a ritual meant for war may block the current. Offerings must match the spirit being called and the intention being set. This precision is part of what makes this ritual so feared and so powerful. Timing is the hidden clock behind the ritual. The forbidden ones rarely occur in daylight. They prefer the hours before dawn when the air is still and the world is less watched. In Yoruba cosmology, some rituals must occur only on Oho Awo, the sacred day of mystery. In others, alignment with moon phases or numerological cycles is critical. The ritual works because it happens at the exact moment when the veil is thinnest. To miss that moment is to knock on a door no longer there. Then comes the incantation, the spark that ignites the entire mechanism. The words are always spoken in the language of the ancestors. Translations do not carry the same power. The ritual cannot be read from a script. It must be remembered or received in trance. The incantation begins not with noise, but with silence. A moment of complete stillness where the practitioner aligns themselves with the ancestral current. The words then flow, sometimes slowly, sometimes in rapid fire, depending on the energy of the ritual. Each syllable, tone, and breath is intentional. Some lines must be chanted, others whispered. Occasionally, a phrase is repeated 3 or 7 times, invoking the numerology of protection or power. Sound in these rituals is not mere voice. It is frequency. The exact pitch, rhythm, and delivery of the words changes their effect. A chant said too loudly might call a different spirit. A name spoken in anger might summon not healing, but judgment. Silence too plays a role. Some rituals demand that no other sound be made, not by the practitioner, not by animals, not by wind. In such moments, silence is not absence. It is a container holding the vibration of the incantation so it can settle into the spiritual field without interference. Secrecy is not about elitism. It is about protection. Forbidden rituals are often hidden because they carry raw, unfiltered power. Too much exposure can weaken their force, or worse, attract the wrong kind of energy. Elders often perform these rituals in hidden groves, caves, or behind closed doors, not because of shame, but because they know what happens when sacred frequencies are diluted by eyes that do not understand. Secrecy is a shield, not a prison. To make this real, let us walk carefully through a genericized example, abstracted not to tease but to respect its sacred boundaries. Imagine a ritual known in some riverine communities as the naming of the path. It is performed when an individual has reached a crossroads in life, illness, betrayal, spiritual calling. The practitioner must bathe in river water at dawn for 7 consecutive days in silence. On the 8th day, they present a bundle of 7 white cowries wrapped in palm leaves to a sacred tree known to house ancestral presence. At the base of the tree, they kneel, left hand holding the bundle, right hand tracing a spiral into the earth. The incantation begins with breath. 3 long inhales, then the first line is whispered into the ground. This is the greeting. The second line calls the ancestors by name, not general titles, but specific names known only in that bloodline. The third line states the dilemma. The fourth line opens the path. If done correctly, a sign will follow. A sudden wind, a bird call, a shift in the light. The practitioner must then cover the bundle with soil, walk away without looking back, and remain silent until the sun sets. This ritual is simple in structure, but immense in power. Each element, posture, offering, timing, sound, secrecy, is necessary. Remove one, and the circuit breaks. Speak the words in a language they weren't born in, and they return to silence. Do it without permission, and the spirits may not come. Or worse, they may come angry. This is why forbidden rituals are not performed often. They are not for curiosity. They are for alignment, restoration, survival. And their anatomy, precise, poetic, and perilous, is what allows them to endure across centuries of forgetting. In today's spiritual landscape, where so many are seeking healing beyond the reach of Western paradigms, the ancient incantations, the forbidden words, have begun to resurface. Not always in their original forms, but as fragments in dreams, vibrations in chants, or sudden phrases that erupt from the mouth in moments of desperation. Across the diaspora, especially in Afro-descendant communities disconnected by centuries of slavery and colonization, there is a quiet hunger to reclaim what was once hidden. And at the heart of this reclamation is the word, the ritual language that still vibrates beneath the skin of forgotten names and severed lineages. Modern practitioners across the diaspora are weaving the ancient codes into new practices, not to reinvent, but to remember. In cities like New Orleans, Salvador, London, and Accra, spiritualists are reconstructing ancestral rituals from oral history, divination, and intuition. Incantations once reserved for remote villages are now being whispered over altars made from repurposed urban materials. The cowrie shells have returned. The sacred water is drawn from kitchen taps but blessed with the same words. Even in digital spaces, podcasts, virtual rituals, closed community forums, seekers are reviving ancestral language as a form of spiritual literacy. What was once hidden is now being cautiously relearned. But this is not just about spiritual growth. It's about resistance. Memory is a form of rebellion when forgetting has been systemically enforced. Every time someone speaks a ritual word that the grandmother only dared to whisper, they disrupt a history of erasure. Every time a child is given a name tied to ancestral power, not just a fashionable African-sounding name, but a name with coded meaning, they rewrite the narrative that said the lineage was broken. To remember the words is to assert that your people had power before slavery, before borders, before conquest. It is to plant a flag in the metaphysical, to claim territory that cannot be colonized. Yet the power of the word is not without risk. To speak these incantations casually is to play with fire. This is not folklore. The spiritual world still listens. The forces these words call are not metaphors. They are presences. To misuse an invocation, to chant without grounding, to activate a ritual sequence for the thrill of it, is to invite real consequences. There are practitioners today who have learned this the hard way. Some report unexpected illnesses, strange dreams, energetic disturbances in their homes. These are not horror stories. They are reminders. The ritual didn't stop working just because the world forgot. And yet, in the same power lies protection. For those who approach the words with respect, preparation, and ancestral alignment, the incantations offer what modern systems often fail to deliver: spiritual defense, clarity of path, and reconnection with purpose. There are countless accounts of people finding their way out of depression, breaking generational curses, surviving danger, or discovering hidden talents after speaking a single ancestral phrase. The words hold memory not just of what happened, but of what's possible. They do not just preserve the past, they restore potential. In a time of rising spiritual hunger and cultural confusion, the forbidden words still matter. Not as relics, not as curiosities, but as living technology. They remind us that language is not neutral, that sound shapes reality, that the voice, when aligned with intention and memory, becomes a wand, a weapon, a womb. So when you hear the echo of something old, something sacred, something your spirit recognizes but your mind cannot name, listen. When your dreams deliver phrases you've never heard but feel like they were meant for you, listen. Because the words are still here. They are waiting for the right mouths to speak them, the right hearts to carry them, and the right moment to make them live again. The ritual survives, not because it was preserved in temples or carved into stone, but because it lives in the mouths of those who still dare to speak. In a world that has tried for centuries to silence ancestral power, the code remains, encoded in lullabies, buried in dreams, whispered during moments of danger and transformation. It has outlived empires. It has survived the burning of shrines, the banning of languages, the exile of priests. Because the true altar was never outside. It was always the breath, the word, the mouth. The incantation may not be spoken often, and it may be guarded by those who understand its weight, but it is not lost. The ritual continues not only in villages, but in city apartments turned into altars, in diaspora homes where elders pray in hybrid tongues, in the silent conversations between ancestors and descendants. Every time someone chooses a remembrance over ridicule, reverence over spectacle, the ritual breathes again. So, I speak this final invocation not from tradition alone, but from trust, that the ancestors still walk with those who walk with truth. May the spirit of your foremothers rise to guard your name. May the code within your breath awaken when you need it most. May the language of your soul return to you in dreams. And may the divine surround you in every direction, not to test you, but to teach you, protect you, and remember you. Like this video if something in your body recognized the truth before your mind caught it. If your skin remembered. If your chest stirred. If your soul leaned forward. Comment what you remember and what you feel, even if it's just a word, a name, a sensation. Your ancestors are listening. Subscribe to the History Store for more journeys like these. Stories not just told, but recovered. Stories that carry you back into power, wisdom, and wonder. And to you, the one who made it to the end, the one who listened with heart, not just ears, thank you. You are part of the ritual now. Let the code speak through you. Let the silence after this moment be sacred, and let the old words find new life in you.